the Bonners was our neighbors. And he know I tell this all the time, Mason Bonner. I would hear a little noise all day, early in the morning, we hear this little noise. Who in the world? What's going on? That's that boy just throwing that ball in that garbage can. Throwing that ball in that garbage can.
In fact, it was my sister's ball. It was my sister's kick pin ball. You know, and I used to sometimes have a bad habit of not cleaning her ball off. I'd have some grits in the garbage can because I'd shoot in the garbage can.
But he always would throw that ball in the garbage, shooting basketball, and he became a professional basketball player. So that's what he wanted to do. But we couldn't understand. It was funny to us.
You know, and maybe one day I may not have got it clean outside the shoes, man. She had some grits on there, man. She was upset with me. But I used what I had in order to still continue to play. I can remember my mother saying this every time that I waste something. She says this, said, you don't have time to waste anything. We had to eat all the food that we have served. We couldn't waste any and throw any away. We had to get full value for every piece of money we had. We had S&H green stamps. We had them gold stamps. They, back in those days, learned how to make it with less so that they could have more to give to their children, see.
You had to. You didn't have anything. You had to know how to save and what to buy and what to buy. You know, to spend, you had very little money. And you shared. Whenever a woman was pregnant, like when I was pregnant with my second child, you shared clothes. The pregnant women, they passed them on to the next.
At that time, McKenzie Court was really for single parents, mother that was, my mother wasn't even on welfare. She was working, doing part-time work at that time too. And my mother was unique because she really raised 8 of us, almost, as you say, by herself, even though our fathers wasn't in the home at that time. And he was out of the home, so she really done a great job of raising. And at that time too, the single parents at McKenzie Court, they was great workers, and they seemed primary to our interest in us getting an education and doing better. And my mother would install in me as far as learning how to be a survivor, taking care of siblings, helping taking care of my sisters and brothers. So she taught me how to survive and being as far as womanhood and going into woman, and encouraged me to do better.
We watched out for your children. We made sure that they went home at a certain time, and if they was at your house, you let the parents know where they was. You even, if they got ready to eat and you was gonna eat, you asked them, calling out. Well, you didn't have a phone, so you had to call and ask, could they eat with your children?
Anytime anybody talks about McKenzie Courts, they talk about George Curry, because George Curry actually had a national platform, and still does have a national platform to talk about McKenzie Courts. George Curry grew up with me. He's a contemporary, graduated from high school the year before I did. Enjoyed writing when he was young. I think that he sort of dreamed about writing for the Tuscaloosa News. That didn't happen. But there was, I think that just his reading the Tuscaloosa News, and I think I've heard him say this, that his reading the Tuscaloosa News and thinking that there had to be another side to some of the stories that appear, you know, made him want to be a journalist.
Our educators came out of McKenzie Court. Teachers came out of McKenzie Court. Preachers came out of McKenzie Court. We had civil rights leader came out of McKenzie Court.
My greatest story that my family tells is about how we took one chicken and ate 5 days with 8 children. And then we went to how it happened, and we said, we started out with a baked chicken. We had this baked chicken, the whole chicken was baked. So that was one meal that all of us ate. took the bones off of that, because rather than us getting a bone, cut all the meat off of the bone so that they could have the bone to make two different things, soup and chicken dumplings. So I think that the innovations back in those times were a part of people appreciating waiting to have success. The microwave generation that wants their success right now, they'd rather spend more right now than to spend less for a longer time and save.
I happen to think that everything that happens to you in your life, that there is a purpose for it. And when I was growing up, I think I was in the 3rd grade, 8 years old. I read, I was not in public school at the time, I was in a private school, but that was my first introduction to real black heroes. And I read a story about Sojourner Truth and how she had been an abolitionist and how she had gone out and talked for women's rights and stuff, and I wanted to be like her. So this is age 8. Of course, I had no idea how you get to be like Sojourner Truth. I didn't want to be a slave in order to be like her. So later on, I guess I was about 12, there was a black man who had killed a white police officer. Maybe he was a deputy, but anyway, it was someone who was in law enforcement. And in the neighborhood, we all heard about what had happened, that there was this white officer who had walked up the street in McKenzie Courts and was knocking on doors, and he finally fell dead in somebody's yard, that he had been shot. And he had not been shot in McKenzie Courts. It was in an area called Barnes Quarters. He had been shot and had walked up through McKenzie Courts. And they said that a black man had done it. So that was really scary, because we're talking early 60s, maybe 61, 62. So the day, probably a couple of days after the incident, I was out in the yard playing, turning flips, one of the few times I was turning flips, and I saw all of these police cars coming through on the street where I live, through the neighborhood, going over to arrest the man. Now, we were told that they were going to arrest the man. And as I turned flips and saw all of those police cars, I knew that that man was not going to be treated fairly, because he was a black man. Everybody knew he was a black man. All the police officers were white. I knew that he was not going to be treated fairly. I thought that, as a child, I thought that they would probably kill him. And as I turned to flip, I said, when I grow up, I want to be a lawyer so that I can represent people like that, so that they can be treated fairly, so that they can have some justice in the system. Now, of course, I was young and naive, and I now know that it takes more than just having the desire to have justice. But that really instilled in me the desire to bring justice to my people. And so I sort of followed that course.
And we had a future outlook on our life, because we knew that the children and the family that came out of McKenzie Court would make history. And that's why it's so important that I teach my generation, my grandchildren, about where I came from and where I plan to go. And that is a root that grows for me, and as far as being a product, as they say, a child out of McKenzie Court. Can any good come out of McKenzie Court? And I say yes.